Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Football Italia Summer Show, a new episode. It's been a lot of Milan this week because there is a lot going on at Milan, both in terms of club structure and in terms of coach. It's a new one. It's Ruben Amorim. We've already discussed him at some point last week, but today we go even more in depth on his time at Manchester United, what he should do at Milan, or what he should avoid, and what he should avoid from what he has already done at Manchester United. I have here to discuss about all these things Jack Flintham from the Manchester Evening News. Jack, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Lorenzo. It's good to join you.
Thank you. Amorim signed. The announcement was made last week. 3-year contract with an option for a further campaign. The news coming earlier this week from Italy suggests that he's going to have a direct influence on Milan transfer market because there will be one director working closely with him, but then all the club transfer strategy will start from what he actually needs on the pitch. From November 2024 until last January, he was the Manchester United coach. Jack, how would you sum up his time at the club, first of all?
Well, it's interesting because when he first joined, obviously, Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos arrived at Manchester United in what was February 2024, and there was a big sort of feeling that Ineos would decide to go their own way with a manager and appoint a manager of their own. It looks for all the world that was going to happen, and Eric Ten Hag, who was the manager at the time, was going to step away until a really good FA Cup final performance last game of the season against Manchester City, and that kind of changed the plans entirely. United played their best stuff under Eric Ten Hag that day, and it felt like, okay, maybe Ten Hag could, carry on. So after a summer of pretty much indecision and no real way forward for Manchester United, they eventually decided to stick with Ten Hag. However, it soon became clear that this was sort of out of convenience rather than any real need to sort of keep him, or wanting to keep him, I should say. And by October, he'd been sacked. It was a bad start to the season, and United were under a lot of pressure. Ineos were under a lot of pressure. And when they appointed Amorim, he came in pretty much straight away. He was the top choice for pretty much everyone at Ineos. They wanted him to come in immediately. And at the time, Amorim wasn't so keen on that idea. He wanted to stick with Sporting. He wanted to see the job through there. Obviously, they went on to win the title. But because United were adamant that he should start immediately, he decided to bite the bullet and go to Manchester United mid-season, which I think if he had his time again, he might have not done. Because I think what happened in that first season, yes, he saw a lot of issues that Manchester United had at the time. I think he got a good sense of the squad. But I think that it also kind of gave him a pretty hard beginning. And that first season, it soon became apparent that the Champions League qualification, which was the main aim, was not going to be achieved. Amorim was quick to implement his style. He brought in the 3-4-2-1, which to Manchester United fans has now become infamous. He quickly, in the space of what was probably about a month, had fallen out with Marcus Rashford, and Rashford, that sort of relationship compounded, and I think we'll speak about it later, with some pretty explosive comments in press conferences, where it became a war between Amorim and Rashford. But that first season, he moved and he decided to eventually sacrifice the Premier League. Premier League games became these sort of non-events where Manchester United would play academy players, they'd play fringe players, just so that they could be in a position to win the Europa League. Now, in all credit to Amorim, there were some amazing performances in the Europa League. Casemiro sort of began his arc to redemption at Manchester United in the Europa League. Some brilliant performances. I'm thinking particularly the game against Lyon. I believe it was the quarterfinal, but I might be wrong. That was sensational comeback from Manchester United. And it was all going smoothly until getting to the final, and United put in a pretty tepid display against Tottenham, lost that game, and that ultimately left Amorim without Champions League for next season, which obviously resulted in less transfer business than he possibly would have liked. He couldn't make the wholesale changes he needed to change a squad that was built for a 4-2-3-1 formation. So in the end, his second season, albeit the signings were better, and I'm thinking the likes of Mbeumo and Cunha, both really good additions to Manchester United, didn't cost the world either. It all kind of sort of unravelled, mainly due to his persistence of playing 3-4-2-1, and by the time he left in January this year, it feels like so long ago, but by the time he left in January this year, his position had become untenable, mainly due to his I would describe it as rigidity and stubbornness to stick with his methods, and eventually Ineos had enough of that.
And I mean, in terms of tactical stubbornness, we have a few good examples in Italy, I would say. So if he continues that, I don't think he's going to be alone. But the way he built the team, was he like, did the club follow his actual requests, or there was more of a clash? Do you think there is something that has to be connected between Manchester United full results under Amorim and what the club actually did to make the coach happy and give him the reinforcements that he wanted?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a argument to suggest that Amorim didn't have the sort of backing that United fans and possibly himself would have liked. However, having said that, the first window, so January 2025, money was tight, and United weren't. They're not a club who want to go into the January window. The January window nowadays is seen as this window where, if you're doing business, you've got something wrong. It's a failure, and there's not seen as much value in it because clubs are able to keep hold of players who or ask for price tags that are way more than what the player is worth. However, Amorim was firm. He said, and I think this is partially down to the fact that he decided to meet United halfway and decided to come to United mid-season. He said, to make my system work, I need a left wing back. And United listened, and they ended up bringing in Patrick Dorgu, who I'm sure you guys are familiar with. And albeit it seemed like that was an ambition from Manchester United that we're going to back this manager, I would say Dorgu wasn't necessarily the starter that United needed at that time. He was still quite raw. His talent definitely there, and we've seen it since Amorim's left, ironically. Just before his injury this season, he did exceptionally in games against Manchester City and Arsenal. But at the time, it wasn't quite what United needed. He wasn't ready to be that starter at left wing back. However, it was a sign that United were willing to back him. They backed him further that summer. I'm thinking players like, as I mentioned earlier, Mbeumo and Cunha were both signed to play the sort of two in that 3-4-2-1 system. so they'd play behind the lead striker, who was also a new signing in Benjamin Šeško. There was also the decision to let Rasmus Højlund go. He joined, obviously, as you know, Napoli, and there was a feeling, having seen him after just a season, Amorim was like, well, I need a new striker if we're going to compete. And United were like, yeah, okay. And they backed him there. I think there needed to be more changes to this United squad if they wanted to go fully in with Amorim. And that's why it was such a surprise in some ways that he was fired in January 2026, because United were halfway through sort of rebuilding a team in his image. And that sort of... But I think there was a number of factors. The one that broke the camel's back was the sort of incredible press conference at Leeds United after a draw there, where he insisted he was the manager, not the head coach. He felt that people within Ineos were sort of briefing against him in some respects, and he decided to air his grievances to the world, and that ultimately was his downfall. But if he did not said that, and maybe if he'd towed the line a bit more in public, perhaps he would have been backed even further, and United would have completed a transition to 3-4-2-1. But the results weren't coming as they would have liked.
You mentioned the strikers, and it's a topic that Milan's fans will discuss a lot this summer, because they've got players like Rafael Leao, they've got Christian Pulisic. They've been playing with the 3-5-2 system this season. Most of the season outside of their natural role, because they've been used mostly as centre forwards. They were used mostly as centre forwards by Massimiliano Allegri. Now Amorim is going to reshape this a little bit. Maybe you could see a link between Leao and Rashford in terms of relationship with Amorim, in terms of an attacking player playing on the left. Then, of course, the situation is different now, because Leao has already said, even before Amorim arrived, that he sees himself outside of Milan. So it's not necessarily... I mean, the ideas from Leao are already pretty clear, apparently. But there is a matter about the central forward, somebody that Milan had to bring in. Now, Manchester United have had different type of strikers. You mentioned Højlund, you mentioned Sesko. There was also another familiar Serie A face like Joshua Zirkzee, who are all sort of different centre forwards. In your experience, in your perspective, where do you think Amorim's football showed its best? With which sort of striker, Sesko or Zirkzee, or other type of formation of choices?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think that it soon became apparent that Højlund wasn't going to be the guy for Manchester United. Now, as you'll be aware more than me, I think he's done okay back at Napoli. He's shown good signs, but I think there was this feeling at Manchester United that the weight of sort of playing as the main guy for Manchester United, he wasn't capable of doing that. Now, he had a good first season, but obviously he was a player, I believe, brought in by Erik ten Hag, so that already made it difficult for him. Now, Benjamin Šeško, on the other hand, he has shown he's more than capable. However, he had his best games since Amorim's left, and that's another sort of mark against Amorim, is that Šeško was his guy. Obviously, there was talk about Victor Gyökeres coming in from Sporting. Obviously, Amorim did ever so well to transform him into an elite European striker. Obviously, Arsenal won the race there. But Šeško was seen as sort of a solid alternative to Gyökeres, but you just couldn't get the best out of him. And I remember I was at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, where I believe Šeško might have played, if not his last match under Amorim, at least one of the final ones, and he came off the bench missed two golden chances, and then left the field, even though United had run out of substitutes due to an injury. And it kind of summed up where we were at with Šeško, and there was a feeling, oh dear, this guy might be a flop up front as well. You could talk about Joshua Zirkzee. His time, he's never really looked like it anywhere close to being the starter for Manchester United. He's done better, ironically, when Amorim played him as one of the two number 10s. I thought he was more involved. He did well in that Europa League run to the final, but as the lone striker, it wasn't really working. So, to answer your question, under Amorim, that they never really had a centre forward who could sort of command and look like he could score 20 goals a season. And the goals came through Bruno Fernandes, who's just United's main man. He holds the weight of the team up regardless of the manager. But as centre forwards go, it's been really lacking. And I don't know whether necessarily Rashford would have been that guy if he'd have stayed on Amorim's good spot, because the thing with Rashford was, and the thing with Leao, although you mentioned he's going to be leaving, is that I don't see how he fits into an Amorim system. He couldn't really play wing back. He couldn't really do the centre forward work as well as you would want. He wasn't going to be Amorim's Gyökeres. So it always felt like they were going to really struggle to find a place for him in this in the United side. So I think when it comes to Milan, when they're looking for a centre forward, they're going to have to look for someone who fits that sort of Gyökeres bill. I think that he'll want someone who's powerful, who can make those runs, who can hold off defenders, and crucially get them scoring. Because maybe if Šeško had found his feet quicker at Manchester United in the Premier League, Amorim might not have left them. But at the same time, he's shown it since Amorim's left. So it'll be interesting to see if he can find a striker who he can mould into his image.
I was looking down because I was searching for Šeško's stats. It's 2 goals in 17 appearances across all competitions with Amorim, and it's 7 goals in 13 appearances across all competitions with Carrick. I have just a couple of final questions for you, Jack. One again on strikers. I mean, the 3-4-2-1 in here, we mostly watch Syria. The 3-4-2-1, those two attacking midfielders, are they actually attack midfielders, or did you see a possibility for them to play wider, like attacking wingers? Or do you think Amorim will be looking for something different? Because if there's room maybe for a left winger, then maybe they could talk to Leao and say, we'll try to make this together. Although I think even Milan are not too happy about keeping Leao. But if it's just attacking midfielders, then I agree with you, even tactically, there wouldn't be that much space for her like Leao.
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention that, because I think when Amorim's system looked at its best, you were looking at Brian Mbeumo in the sort of number 10 role on the right, with Amad playing as a right wing back. And that sort of fluidity worked quite well. Now, you would see Mbeumo drift out to the right and Amad cutting inside and causing sort of like underlaps to confuse a lot of defenders, actually. And it looked quite free-flowing. And Amad and Mbeumo have struck up a really good friendship since the latter arrived at Manchester United. So there is that sort of element that they aren't going to be sort of asked to sit narrow and drift inside, just keep inside, I should say. They will be allowed to move out wider. But I think when Amorim's football looked at its best, you were looking at sort of the three front players, so your centre forward and your 2 attacking midfielders, sort of in that box area, and you're looking at your sort of wing backs like Amad, Dorgu when he was playing in that position, to sort of get the balls into the box. Now, where it all kind of fell down for United was sometimes when there was an instance against Everton. I remember that Manchester United were down to Everton were down to 10 men at Old Trafford. They were 1-0 up, and the second half came, and Manchester United didn't change the tactics. They didn't chuck more players forward, and it became sort of predictable, kind of slow passing, balls out wide, try and get in the box, and Everton are a team who can clear balls, long balls into the box out all day long if they have to. They weren't testing them. There wasn't anything to sort of make the defence think, and I think that's an issue with Amorim's system. Is if you come up against the side who want to sit in and keep a clean sheet, a lot of the time it was found wanting, and the players were in the similar positions. Some of Amorim's best games came against teams who wanted to come out and attack them. He got a win at Manchester City by playing a really fast counter-attacking style that City couldn't, a Pep Guardiola City couldn't deal with. So yeah, there is space there for the attacking midfielders to drift out onto the wings, but I would say that whoever plays in that number 10 role would need to be first and foremost able to play sort of centrally and have a good link up with those wing backs, because otherwise Amorim's system will ultimately fail.
Very interesting, Jack. I think it already explains a lot about the Lea situation, but also the attack and also the attacking players that Milan will have to find in the market. Perhaps Pulisic could be one who can act as one of the two number 10s. But for Leao, I have a bit more doubts. We'll see anyway. I have one final question for you. We've talked about the attack. We've talked about the system, which is going to be 3-4-2-1, defended quite strongly by Amorim, if I remember well, at Manchester United. How about the rest? What do we have to expect in terms of defense, high line, high press? Is it something that we're going to see, or we have to look for something different, expect for something different?
It's interesting because I think with Manchester United, when they were playing, I don't think there was ever really a fear about the defence. Ironically, it was always, they always felt like they'll be able to keep a team out, but would they be able to score a goal? And I think with United, he managed to breathe a sort of new, fresh life into that defence. I think it's quite a safe system in the sense that the three centre-backs sit quite deep, and you'll have sort of your right centre-back and your left centre-back will be expected to sort of cover those positions when your wing-backs are pushing forward. I wouldn't say necessarily they play a high line. I think it's quite... And I think that was where it sort of fell through for Amorim, because I think United fans wanted it to be a bit more of a risk and for United to sort of push out and take the game to teams. And I think, and I don't always agree with this stance, but certain clubs have different ways of wanting their team to play. And Manchester United fans want their team to play attacking football. Now, you could argue every team wants that, but I think particularly at United, it felt like Amorim was a bit too safe, and the team would play for the clean sheet rather than playing for the wins and sort of blowing teams out 5-6-0 or something ridiculous like that. So I think what you can expect is sort of a safe system. It'll be built on a team that can sort of sit back and hold their line, and it works quite well away from home. I will say that. I think some of Amorim's best moments came away from home. I mean, he ended the hoodoo at Liverpool for Manchester United with a win there early at the start of this season just gone. And I think that's what Milan fans have got to expect, is not necessarily a team who's going to push out and go all out for the victory. They're going to want to have a strong base and take it from there. And I think that'll work if they can bring in that striker. And that's what United didn't have. United didn't have an elite striker who was going to score a whopping amount of goals, like an Erling Haaland does for Manchester City or Gyökeres did for Sporting.
Jack, spectacular insight, really. I think we can already see something, maybe expect something. Milan fans, of course, will be hoping that Amorim's time at the club goes very, very differently for what happened at Manchester United. But it was good to chat to you. It was great to chat to you because I think you already explained a lot that we can expect from him and Milan next season. So thank you very much for joining us in Football Italia, and I'm sure we'll talk again very, very soon.
Thank you for having me, Lorenzo. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.